It's review season. We've been reviewing players on an individual basis, but now we're going to do a team review that's coming up today on Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Hayden Heilsorn, and with me is my co-host, or the longtime actual host of the show, the big dog, Jay Foster's here. Sorry, I don't know exactly how to say your name. Is it Forster or
It is Foster. The first R is silent, which it trips everyone.
It tripped me just now. So there you go. And I'm your co-host here, and we're working together on this thing. And it's been season review time. We've been looking at this past year, Jay. The Blue Jackets, not quite what we wanted. No playoff run. So all we have to do is go back and watch them, how they did this past year. We've been doing them on an individual basis, but now let's look at the position groups as a whole, because we have three of them: the forwards, the defensemen, and the goalies. But let's start up front. Let's start up with the forwards. We know our captain is a forward, Boone Jenner. We got his review coming up shortly, later in the week, or later next week, excuse me. We got some of our star players, Kirill Marchenko, who came up through the ranks late in the year, Kent Johnson, a guy who put up a lot of flash. But just amongst the forward group, Jay, what did you like? What did you not like? What needs to be improved? What did you see in the forward group this year with the Jackets?
I think I saw a step forward for the team this season, which I think a lot of people expected. You know, you pick up Johnny Gaudreau in the offseason, that immediately makes your forward group better, you know? But I think even beyond that, I think a lot of the players that were already on the team took steps forward. I think Patrick Laine had a really good season. I think, you introduced some of the young players. Kent Johnson had a really good rookie season. Kirill Marchenko led all rookies in scoring and played like 56 games or something crazy. So, shout out to him, obviously. And after last season, so the 21-22 season, the Blue Jackets couldn't seem to buy a goal in that season. And I think they took a huge step forward this season. Did they score a lot more goals? No, but I feel like they were much more offensively minded this season than they were last season, which, baby steps. Next season, I'm expecting a way bigger push of goal scoring from this group.
They did seem to be a lot more productive. It seemed like that they were just playing with a lot more offensively minded, just free-flowing mentality. And I think Johnny Gaudreau being in that group this year had a lot to do with that. And maybe a lot of it was, hey, we want to be on the top line with Gaudreau, and we know that this franchise doesn't really have a set-in-stone top line, so let's put as much skill as we can have on the ice. It did feel like every single night it was a skill show for the Jackets, and that's something that the Jackets haven't really had. And the forwards are supposed to lead that charge, so it felt like they had that this year, and it was really exciting. But going back to that, Jay, it really was. It really did feel like night in, night out, it was a mixer of putting guys, you'd like to see, you'd think in an ideal world it would be Laine, Boone Jenner, Gaudreau, and that would be your top line. But we know it wasn't always that simple. So what were some combinations that stuck out to you this year that you'd like to see continued?
I mean, that's the big one for me is I think Gaudreau, Laine, and Jenner, I kind of was a big advocate in the offseason of I don't think that you needed an elite center to put between those two guys. I think this notion that you have to have an elite center on your top line, otherwise your top line ain't worth a damn, is kind of false. I think if you have two players as good as Gaudreau and Laine, you can put a guy like Boone Jenner in between them and have success. And I think we really saw that this season. I think Boone Jenner had a tremendous amount of success between those two guys. He led the team in scoring, had 26 goals in 68 games, was so close to another 30-goal season, which we haven't seen since like 2015 from Boone Jenner. But yeah, I think that the thing for me is not necessarily that I want specific lines, and it's that I want consistency in my lines. And this has kind of been a theme of the season reviews that I kind of did before you come on board, Hayden, the season reviews that I've done after you've been on board is very much, I would love to have 4 lines that stick together. Like I was looking at, for example, for people, if they haven't listened to yesterday's episode about Cole Sillinger, Cole Sillinger's most frequent line mates this season were Kent Johnson and Kirill Marchenko, which that's a line I'm very interested in. Of Cole Sillinger's 850 minutes last season, 75 of them were with those 2 players. That was his most common line. And he played 75 of 850 minutes. So for me, it's not necessarily that I think we need to find the right lines, because I think a lot of the lines in this group are good, and you can kind of do a mix and match. And I think you put Gaudreau on any line and he'll succeed in the same way that I think if you put Boone Jenner on any line, he'll find a way to succeed, maybe at a lesser rate. But I think he's a really versatile player, and we've seen him play basically every single spot on every single forward line over the past couple of seasons, whether that's first line left wing or fourth line center. Put the guys together, keep them together, let them build chemistry. And I think what you're going to see is what we saw this year, but better, because the forward group was, no one on this team was particularly healthy this season, but the forwards were not nearly as decimated by it as the defense. I can understand why the defense was kind of a mishmash, and we'll get into that in a second, I'm sure, when we talk about the defense as a group. I can understand why the defense kind of turned into a mishmash of Vladislav Gavrikov playing with 16 different guys at any point this season. If you have a healthy forward group and you have lines that are clicking, and we saw that this season, we saw lines that were clicking, like the Johnson, Sillinger, Marchenko line. I thought that was a fantastic line. Their first game, they had something like 75% of the shot attempt on the ice. They played 2 shifts in the third period, and then they got broken up. Put guys together, keep them together. That's kind of what I want from next season, and that's kind of my hope, is that we'll get a coach that doesn't like to just kind of arbitrarily change things up because he perceives something as not working, when actually, when you look at the numbers, it is working.
It is working. And it's not a good sign when Locked On podcast hosts know what the right combination is and it's not being done on the ice. That's really very frustrating. So yes, whoever our next coach is, please get the right lines that Jay and I are looking for. We're going to move to the defense here shortly. I do want to remind you that Birddogs are a phenomenal choice this summer. Guys, if you're looking for, if your girlfriend or, your partner is pushing for certain shorts, they want them to be up higher and a little bit more snug and athletic looking, Birddogs is exactly where you want to go. You're out in public, you say, "What, man, that guy had some nice shorts on." They're probably Birddogs. They fit phenomenal. So go out and get you some Birddogs. And if you do, say something like, go to birddogs.com and you hit /LockedOnNHL. When you enter the promo code LockedOnNHL, they'll throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti-style tumbler, which is fantastic because, when you're up and like, hey, it's go get 'em time and I got my Birddogs on, pour some coffee in that mug and you'll get going nice and fresh. But let's get back to the hockey here. The defense, Jay, it was an absolute mess for the Jackets this year. Zach Werenski, your big dog, the guy that is supposed to provide all the offense, he goes down very early in the season. His buddy, who he kind of took under his wing from the same school, Nick Blankenberg, he's in and out of the lineup all year. A guy you mentioned in the forward review. Gosh, I put his name out of my head completely because we traded him to the Kings. Gavrikov, yeah. He was a longtime guy, supposed to be our next David Savard. We ship him off. It was a mess at that position group this year, Jay. But your overall thoughts on how they played as a whole?
I think the defense did the best they could under a bad situation. I think, and this is not me saying that I think the defense was good or as good as it could be this season. I think a lot of the defense was struggling under problems not of their making, and I was really, really tough on Eric Branson this season. Basically, exclusively to this podcast, I would, talk all kinds of crap about him. And like, I stand by a lot of what I said, but I think a lot of it is, again, similar to what we talked about with Mathieu Olivier, actually, which is Gabranson spent a lot of this season on the top defense pairing because, like you say, Werenski went down 13 games in. Jake Bean went down, I think, 15 games into the season. And then they're both done for the season. Adam Boquist plays 3 games, gets benched. Nick Blankenburg comes in, plays 3 games, breaks his foot. Adam Boquist comes back in, plays 2 games, breaks his ankle. Like, there's 4 defensemen out and you're 20 games into the season, if that, And so you're going to lean on your guys like Gabranson, you guys like Andrew Peeke, who, again, I like Andrew Peeke. I think he's a very, very serviceable third pairing defenseman. I don't think he's a top pairing guy, and I'm 90% sure, I haven't pulled the stat up, I probably should. I am almost 100% sure that he led this team in ice time this season.
He had 80 games. That is the most amongst defensemen.
Oh, by a country mile, I
Yep.
bet. Let me see if I can find what I want from this.
He also, I'll read some stats off too while you search. Andrew Peeke, as you mentioned, a guy that we saw a lot of this year when talking about this group. He's got to be right up there at the top because he played the most. He played 80 games and he produced
1,400 minutes. Eric Branson was in second place with 1283. After that, the third. Do you want to try and guess who the third most played defenseman was this season?
Was it Bayreuther?
Not Gavrikov.
Was it Gavin Bayreuther?
It was not Gavin Bayreuther. It was Tim Burney.
Bernie, I like. I like that guy out there.
I thought Burney had a fantastic season.
Sure, he did.
As a guy that was thrown in, like, hey, everyone's dead. Do you want to play some NHL defense? I thought he did a fantastic job. I think Marcus Bjork did a really good job. I think all the young guys stepped up in a really amazing way. The defense it got hit early and it couldn't recover. And when you're looking for someone to replace Zach Werenski in a group of players that aren't Zach Werenski, you're going to struggle. And I think that was the thing. I think this team hit that bump early. And looking at Zach Werenski, he was having such a good start to the season. Like, he was killing people possession-wise. He had, I believe, 8 points in 13 games to open the season. Like, he was on pace for, actually, I can pull up what he was on pace for because I have that written down. Werenski was on pace for 50 points this season. And, if you Werenski early on, then you're already fighting an uphill battle. And so you try and plug that hole with guys like Gabranson, with guys like Peeke, with guys like Gavrikov, who are fine depth defensemen, but are not top pairing guys, or guys like Nick Blankenburg, who at the start of the season had, 8 NHL games to his name, or you try and put guys like Tim Burney on the top line, or guys like Marcus Bjork, or there's a third one that I'm forgetting that suddenly got called up and played a bunch of time. But like
Lane Peterson.
Sorry?
Was it Lane Peterson, or was he a
Lane Peterson plays forward. I am thinking of
Jake Bean. He's not a new guy though. He's been around for a couple of years.
Yeah. I am thinking of Jake Christensen.
There you go.
I'm thinking of.
Good call.
But so yeah, just a lot of either older depth guys or young guys with potential that are in their rookie season, and I think that's kind of where they fell. I think if you have Zach Werenski this season, this is a very, very different team. And a lot of these guys, I think, have much better seasons because they're not being forced to play above their level.
Yeah, I mean, we were treated nicely when we had Zach Werenski and Seth Jones, both of them back there, rock stars, and then second line pairing in, already forgot his name, and David Savard. It was absolutely phenomenal. You just want to find that magic again, and I feel like Werenski and Blankenburg are kind of the top two that get you the most excited, and they definitely produce the most offensively, but not having them this year was not an accurate look at what you're going to get next year. But Eric Gabranson, that's a guy that's going to stay around. And while he does need to do more than just be a bully out there. I like that he did that. I like that he stood up for the goalie. I think that that kind of stuff is huge in bringing a team together. And in a lot of ways, he is kind of the tough and gritty guy in that position group, which I think is perfect because that can, you can balance it out with having Olivier be that guy in the forward group. You can have Goodbranson be that heavy anchor for the team. I need him to buy in a little bit more to the team and playing more offensive hockey. I'd like to see that out of him. I don't know.
See, I think the complete opposite. I think Branson fully bought in to this team. I don't think you're going to get offense out of him. He's just not built that way. He's old. Like, I say this with all of the love in the world. He's old and he's slow. And I say this acknowledging that he's 32 years old, if that. So not even that old in the grand scheme of things, but he's the oldest defenseman the Blue Jackets have by about 8 years, I think. He's
Can I throw a suggestion for Eric Goodbranson this year? If you're watching this, Eric, why don't you develop a 1T? Develop a solid slap shot. Work on that a whole lot. Just be an absolute tank out there. Like, be that guy that if the puck's, creeping up towards the blue line and we have all these guys snapping it around on offense, all these forwards. I love when those goals are scored at Nationwide Arena, Jay, when your forwards are just like buzzing around the net.
Chaos, yeah.
And then the puck, slides out to the defenseman and he just claps it home. I feel like Goodbranson could be that guy.
And I feel like the other thing about Goodbranson as well is I think he adds a lot more off-ice value than on-ice value.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, you play Goodbranson maybe 10, 12 minutes a night, max. He's a guy that probably gets penalty kill time, even though I don't necessarily agree with that. You don't put him on the power play because why would you? He's a guy that's out there to be that physical presence, to be a checking guy, to be a stay-at-home defenseman. But he's also there to be a veteran for the young players. And I've seen a handful of interviews this season where I think Tim Burney specifically talked about how great it was to have a guy like Goodbranson around. He learned a lot. He likes having a veteran around to play with. It felt like he developed more, And I think that's kind of the role that Goodbranson, I think, has really been enjoying this season. Is he's kind of the dad of the defensive group, And when you look at the average age of this team, the average age of the defenseman specifically, I think, there was Goodbranson at 31, 32. Gavrikov, I believe, was 27 or 28. After that is Werenski at 25. And then I don't think we have an NHL defenseman under the age of 23.
Over the age of 23. Yeah.
Yes, over the age of 23, excuse me. I think those are the only those are the only three defensemen that are over the age of regular guys are over the age of 23, So you need an older guy to hang around and be that veteran presence. And I think Goodbranson can be that. I think there's value in that. I just don't want to see him playing 24 minutes a night again. I really don't. I don't think I have that in me. And the blood pressure is high enough,
What about a guy that's had, been in the league now for coming up on his 5th season, Jake Bean? I feel like when he was hitting his stride with the Blue Jackets, he was pushing the puck offensively around the zone a lot for the Jackets, and I really, really like to see that. He's played 4 years in the league. I'm sorry I don't know the contract situation off the rip with him. I know, he would just be a guy I'd like to see in the mix more just from that perspective. But
Bean is under contract until the end of next season, and then he's an RFA. I wonder if Jake Bean is going to be it's so interesting because I think the defense at the start of the season is going to look very different to the defense at the end of the season. The Blue Jackets have a lot of kids coming in. I would expect David Jiricek to be on the blue line full time next season. I would expect, if Werenski's healthy, I would love to see a top 6 or let's go top 7 because that seems more reasonable. I would love to see our top 6 of Werenski, Bean, Boquist, Jiricek, Blankenberg, Peak, Goodbranson. And I believe that's 7. If that's not 7, then that's my 6th defenseman. I think it's going to look very different. I think there's going to be guys that come out, and I wonder if a guy like Jake Bean becomes a trade piece the Blue Jackets have a ton of young defensemen coming through the ranks right now. Colton Kuhlman's made his AHL debut at the end of the season. He's going to be pushing for a spot. David Jiricek, Denton Matejchuk is going to be pushing for a spot sooner rather than later. You've got Marcus Bjork, you've got Tim Burney, a bunch of other guys whose names I am forgetting.
Those David Jiricek and Denton Matejchuk, those are two names that just got me fired up. That
is the top pairing of the future for me.
It should be.
Like, if you have a top four of Zach Werenski, Nick Blankenberg, David Jiricek, Denton Matejchuk, and that's not even bringing, guys like Stanislav Svozil into account, who I adore. Stan Svozil. I think he's going to be so friggin' good for this team. Not even bringing guys like him into account. Like, if your top four is Werenski, Blankenberg, Jiricek, and Matejchuk, like that, I'm so hype for that. I'm so excited for that to be, maybe not next season, but the season after. I think that's going to be the top four for the Blue Jackets, and I think that's going to be a real good time for everyone except the opposing team.
Yeah. Just one last thought real quickly on the defense group before I move on here. Plenty of good UFAs going to be out there as well. John Klingberg, Matthew Dumba, Eric Johnson, Dmitry Orlov, Shane Gostisbehere. There's plenty of Yarmo to go and bolster that group as well if he chooses to do so.
Shane Gostisbehere is a name that I would take on the Blue Jackets. Let me just pull up the free agent list. It's weird. Again, we're kind of playing the same game that we do with centers, because do you go ahead and pick up a guy that you're going to have to pay a bunch of money to for the next 6 years, or do you get a guy that you maybe sign for a couple of years and, he's that stopgap between Denton Matejchuk, for example, being ready to go? My issue is that I don't know if there's any defenseman out there that will fit the gap of, like, want to keep you around for a couple of years, literally just so you can be kind of a stepping stone to the next piece. I think Matt Dumba is going to get a long-term deal somewhere. Klingberg is going to be tough. I think he had a not great season, which is unfortunate for him, because I believe he signed that 1-year UFA deal to kind of bet on himself, and I love to see players bet on themselves. Eric Johnson, I assume, is going to retire because he's basically legally dead at the age of 35. Orlov, again, intriguing name. I wonder if he's going to go for one last long 6-year contract, and that'll take him right through to 37. Gostisbehere, I would take for a couple of years. Damon Severson is an interesting name. I would take Damon Severson for the next 3 years, maybe, as kind of he's not an older guy, but not too old. He's 28 at the minute. Brian Dumoulin is another name. Like, there's names out there, but I don't know that I go after a defenseman in free agency. I think the Blue Jackets need to bet on what they have.
Agreed.
Because there's already kind of a logjam there. I think if you want to go after a free agency, I think center, potentially. And I wonder if you will allow me to tease for the next segment, I wonder if goaltending is where they go in free agency.
That is a great tease. We just talked about 2 of 3 position groups, and we're going to hit the goalies next here with Locked On Blue Jackets. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We are doing position group reviews now. We did the forwards and the defensemen, and now we have the last line of defense, aka Jay's favorite position, the goalies. And Jay, it was also a mess. No surprise at this position this year for the Jackets. The guy that we've put as fans and as a team a lot of money in, Elvis Merzlikins, not quite the level of play we would have expected for him this year. As a guy who's constantly growing older in the league, we didn't get what we wanted. Jonas Korpisalo, that is a name I will always remember because of what he did for the Blue Jackets. He was part of the deal out to the LA Kings. And then we had a whole bunch of other guys coming and play. We saw a lot of Daniel Tarasov. We saw some Jet Greaves. We saw this Hutchinson kid. We've seen it all, Jay. But what sticks out to you early when you look at your favorite position here?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is, first off, the Blue Jackets used 6 goaltenders this season. That's too many goalies. We've talked about it. I love goalies. This is a goalie-friendly show. If I could field a team of just goalies, I probably would. But in the NHL, if you were using 6 goalies, like that's not a recipe for success. And part of that is down to, some bad luck, some injuries, some illness. I know Elvis Merzlikins took a leave of absence from the team to go to Latvia because his grandmother passed away, I believe. At some point, the universe is going to have to give this guy a break, because I think you look at Elvis and you look at the rookie season he had, and I'm always going to remember his rookie season because his first victory was against the Florida Panthers and against Sergei Bobrovsky. His first shutout was in Vegas as Elvis in Vegas. Like, the narrative is just so good. And then I believe after that, he went on to have another 4 shutouts in his next 7 games. Like, I'm always going to remember the 5 shutouts in 8 games of Elvis's rookie season. And I think you see flashes of who that guy is now. And I think it's been a really tough couple of years for him. Post rookie season, the goaltending of the Blue Jackets' future is set. It's going to be Merzlikins. It's going to be Matisse Kivlenieks. Kivlenieks passes away. Elvis is understandably deeply, deeply affected by this, to the point where, I think even 2 seasons later, I think he's still deeply, deeply affected by that. Korpisalo is a tough one. Korpisalo has been such a professional for this team for so long. He did his time in the minors. He won the Calder Cup with them in 2015. He's the owner of, I believe, the most saves ever made in an NHL playoff game, with like 85, I think. Something fully insane. He has played behind so many different goaltenders. He finally got his moment with Bobrovsky leaving in 2019. Elvis comes in, they end up sharing the net. Korpisalo, injury after injury after disappointing season. He finally gets, I think he had hip surgery in the offseason. Doesn't start the season with the Blue Jackets. I believe his first game was when they were in Finland, not Sweden. Sorry to all the Finnish listeners out there. I know you exist. I didn't forget your country, I promise. His first game was like a month into the season, and then he looked like a different goalie. He was fantastic this season behind a truly terrible Blue Jackets defense. So of course they were going to flip him at the deadline. And that sucks, because I like Korpisalo. I like him a lot. But I think he's been a Blue Jacket for about 2 years longer than anyone basically expected him to be a Blue Jacket. They brought Elvis in. He was the heir apparent to Bobrovsky. He hasn't delivered yet. Maybe this is me being a homer or being biased, because I love Elvis as a human. I think he's a fantastic person. I believe in him. I believe in his ability to get back to the player that we saw in his rookie season. Yes, he's not getting any younger, but he's only 29. He's still got a few good years ahead of him. And if they can get league average goaltending out of Elvis this season, like, I'm happy with that. And I think it's so tough to look at the goaltending this season and look at kind of that in a vacuum, because the defense was so unbelievably brutal. Were the goaltenders bad because the defense was bad, or does the defense look bad because the goaltender was bad? And I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think neither position group was very good, but it's hard for me to look at this season and say, yeah, Elvis was bad, Elvis needs to do better, because I think, yeah, that's true. But having a competent and healthy defense in front of him probably will do a whole lot for his game and his confidence. And one last thing before I finish up my rant on goaltending. There's going to be a new goaltending coach in the offseason. Does that affect Elvis? Probably. In a good way. We'll see.
That's a very good point. That is a very good point, Jay, about the goaltending coach. That switch up there, I imagine, would provide a spark. Hopefully it does. And I want to go back to something you said about, did the goalies make the defense look bad, or did the defense make the goalies look bad? Obviously, it is a little bit of both, but I think a lot of times, and I should have brought this up in the last segment, a lot of times the defense let the goalies out to just complete dry, where it just was like, we look like an AHL team. This is the reason why the Blue Jackets are the bottom of the NHL standings right now, because we don't know what we're doing out there as a team, as a franchise. Nothing looks right.
At
And
5-on-5 this season for the Blue Jackets, they had 1,864 shots for 2,333 against. They're allowing 500 shots more than they are taking.
yeah, that's so bad.
You
And that's
know,
on the
and like
forwards too.
Elvis's stats on his own weren't good, but it's, I don't know. To me, goaltending is such a mental game as well that when you let one or two in, it's so hard. And this is my experience as well. Now, I play beer league. I don't play in the NHL. So I'm probably not as mentally stable as some of the NHL guys. But when you let in one or two goals, when your defense is basically allowing breakaways every 3 minutes, when, you know, you've got guys deflecting the puck into their own net, when you've got missed coverage, when you've got bad decisions, you get in your head about it. You feel like you've got to save every single puck to give your guys a chance of winning. And you could kind of see that in Elvis's game specifically. Is like, we're going to get a little bit technical here in terms of goaltending, not too technical, but you can see when a goalie is confident in his defense because he moves less. Elvis spent a lot of this season kind of not flailing, but there was a lot more movement than there usually is. Elvis is normally a pretty chill goalie that very occasionally will go insane and like double pad stack, throw his stick in the corner and like scorpion kick, you know? For the most part, Elvis is a pretty chill goalie. This season, he looked like he was, they say, you know, fighting the puck. It felt like he was fighting the play a lot, and he felt like he had to overreact. That's the word I'm looking for. He overreacted a lot this season. And that's the sign of a goalie who has no confidence in himself and a goalie that has no confidence in the play in front of him. So that's something I'd like to see change this season. Is I'm going to be paying very close attention to goaltending and to Elvis specifically as we kind of get into preseason and training camp.
Yeah, absolutely. Another guy who I actually think looked pretty solid at goaltending, despite having such bad defense in front of him, was Daniel Tarasov. Guy who, you know, taking advantage of a very unfortunate situation that happened within the club. He is a guy that has came through the ranks, had a lot of time to play this past year with the Blue Jackets, and I thought we saw a young man grow. I thought we saw a lot of Daniel Tarasov. I remember there was a point in the year where people were done with Elvis and they wanted to see him right away. They wanted to see Terry. Terry came in, not great to start, but then he kind of eased in and we're like, wow, this guy, there's something here. There's a true future NHL goaltender here, and that's really, really exciting. And that's what led to, I think, us moving Corpy, is that we saw what we liked in Daniel Tarasov. But you just provided the technical eye on Elvis. What is the technical eye seen with Tarasov, if anything, that is sticking out to you?
I think kind of it's not the same thing. It's kind of almost the opposite. Daniil Tarasov is just ice cold in net, and I mean that as a compliment. He is so technically sound, and he is so, like, I think, confident in himself that if you watch him play, he doesn't do a lot of the moving and the flailing. A lot of his saves are like, right, save, done, get up, reset, save, done, up, reset. You know, it's very technical. It's very almost robotic, which is great. You love to see it. I am a huge Tarasov fan. I think he could very well be the goalie of the future. He's still pretty young. He's what, 20? I want to say 23?
24.
24, yeah. So, you know, still basically for a goalie, that's a baby. You know, he's really only starting to hit his prime now. I think it depends on what the Blue Jackets do with their backup position this season. And like for me personally, I would go out and I would get a veteran guy to back Elvis up, and I would put Tarasov in the AHL and I would keep him there. And I would be like, right, you're spending the entire year down here. You're going to get 45, 50 AHL games. Go nuts, kid. You know? Because at that age, goalies need to play. And I think having him with the club and backing up is not the best thing for his development, because you see like I see flashes in Tarasov, and maybe this is just the Russian connection. I see flashes of Tarasov, what I saw in Bobrovsky at his peak. You know, when we had Vezina Bobrovsky in, was it 2019? He won his second Vezina, 2018 or 2019, and he was just incredible. Like, that's what I see in Tarasov, and I think there's a potential, like, there's a hidden gem there that the Blue Jackets have.
A lot of great goalies have came from Russia over the last few years. Sergei Bobrovsky, Andrei Vasilevsky, maybe Daniel Tarasov can be the next man in that line of
You heard
fantastic
it here
goalies.
first.
Yeah, maybe.
Daniel Tarasov is the next Andrei Vasilevsky. You heard it here first.
That would be really, really cool. And that take is a great way to wrap up this edition of Locked On Blue Jackets. Tomorrow, we'll be doing another episode talking about Boone Jenner, a little season review. Thank you so much for listening and for making us your first listen every day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms, YouTube, and even the SiriusXM app. I've been Hayden Heilsorn. You can find me on Twitter at HaydenH971. Your co-host, Jay Foster. You can find him on Twitter at _Jacob Foster. Thank you so much all for listening. This has been Locked On Blue Jackets.